Yi's voice came from behind them. "What are you grumbling about, all by yourself?" Xuan's body stiffened, and he stuttered, I... Xuan wanted to help him respond, but the tongue was refusing control. It couldn't be helped. His most trusted, beloved friend turned out to be the one he feared most, hiding next to him by his side. Now that there was no one around, who knew what he was going to do? Who wouldn't be scared? Suddenly, Mingyi's fingers dug in. Pain flared into Xuan's shoulder, and he was pushed downward. A pale, white hand suddenly lunged out from the creek and grabbed for Xuan's neck. A water ghoul. With Mingyi's push, that hand missed. Then he blasted it with his palm, and screams came from the waters. That creature was probably obliterated by the blast. Xuan sat on the ground, having fallen over, and Mingyi pulled him up, asking, "Do you have something wrong with your brain, washing your face with just any water from the Blackwater demon lair?" Xuan had just now used the creek water that had been soaking the corpses of water ghouls to calm down, and should be feeling disgusted. Yet he had no mind to notice those details. His face and hair were still dripping. Drenched like a drowned dog, lost and forlorn. He dazedly let Mingyi pull him up, and dazedly followed after him. Truthfully, when thinking about it closely, everything relating to this Ming Xiang had always reeked of dubiousness. He was the Earth Master, therefore very matter-of-factly, every distance-shortening array on the road was drawn by him. That should have been his specialty technique, yet it had frequent issues. Leaving Puchi Shrine, the four of them were sent to the town of Fugu for some unknown reason, and problems also occurred when both the Wind and Water Masters were being transported out of the Blackwater Island. Was it the transportation chamber that had wasted away through the years in need of repair? Was it something else causing trouble? Was the culprit behind the scenes too omnipotent? Why think so much? The simplest answer was that it was Mingyi who had meddled in everything. The first time the Wind Master was taken away by the Reverend of Empty Words, it was Mingyi who had lost sight of him. The Wind Master who lost his spiritual powers was also first discovered by him. The one who stayed by Xuan's side and knew inside and out his fears and actions was him. The one who knew the Wind Master's verbal password and could command the Reverend of Empty Words to threaten Xuan to open the doors to that protection array at the Terrace of Cascading Wine was also him. At that time, he cracked the establishment plaque to the Temple of Wind and Water with his own hands without feeling. Maybe it was done out of necessity, or maybe he was doing it on purpose in the first place. Under the guise of an excuse to openly dismantle the establishment plaque of his enemy, and his enemy had to be grateful too. What daring arrogance. With little odd actions such as these, it wasn't like Xuan was never suspicious, and he had tried to probe, asking those 3 questions. Yet, he had never thought that something this inconceivable, this audacious, could happen. That a ghost had impersonated a heavenly official and had always been hiding amongst them. Ship-sinking Blackwater had always been low-key. To exist under a different identity for years, of course he's low-key. Mingyi's response at the time really didn't have any flaws. He had devoured the reverend of empty words and possessed its powers, able to command it like a minion. A supreme ghost king could naturally override its might, unfettered by the restrictions of its unique traits. If he wanted to speak the truth, then he could speak the truth. If he wished to deceive, then he could speak lies. That skeleton had dexterous hands and feet, corresponding with the identity of the Earth Master. Why worship it in the nether water manner? It had to be done. Those were the remains of a heavenly official, after all. If they weren't treated with solemn respect and were carelessly buried, the bones couldn't rest in peace and the coffin would not hold. Thus, he could only regard it with grand formalities and worship it within his own halls. However, what made Xuan guess his identity wasn't just this, but that lunge. The Water Master had asked why the skeleton would experience terminal lucidity. Mingyi answered in a rush to say that because he said, as long as this thing won't stand in my way, it doesn't matter who he is. But in actuality, what really provoked the real Mingyi wasn't that, but the words that were said after. Lord Earthmaster, because he was the real Earthmaster. And the one impersonating him was standing right before him, nonchalantly and intentionally leading them astray. Sometimes Mingyi would also do the opposite on purpose and pull them back on track to escape suspicion. For example, he had said to Xuan, "You really do have spies in the heavens." Yet, wasn't that spy himself? That was why Xuan had responded so ironically, "Don't you already know that?" Implying, why play pretend? However, the word spy was probably inaccurate. An agreement was more likely between those two, such as an exchange of information. The two supreme ghost kings cooperated out of mutual benefit, so it was a win-win situation. Blackwater snuck into the heavenly court and observed all movement in the heavenly realm, big and small. Xuan took root in the mortal realm, expanding the number of worshippers. Besides this, whether they cooperated in other matters, it wasn't known. Junwu sending the Earthmaster to infiltrate Ghost City was no different than flooding the temple of a dragon king, or sending thieves to a bandit's lair. Up until now, there were probably only two accidents that arose while he was undercover. The first one was the ascending fire dragon spell. An imposter obviously wouldn't do something so pointless. Xuan was more inclined to think that the one who cast the ascending fire dragon spell was the real Mingyi, who had managed to escape. In order to disguise oneself as someone completely different and sneak into the heavenly court, one must have a thorough understanding of that person. Thus, the impersonated must be kept alive so that small details such as experiences, skills, spiritual device manipulation, and so on could be dug out little by little. The fake Mingyi more than likely kidnapped and imprisoned the real Mingyi right after he passed his heavenly calamity, but before his ascension. Otherwise, if the real Mingyi had already made contact with the other heavenly officials, it'd be easy for the imposter to be discovered. The ascending fire dragon spell was an accident. So when Xuan received the news, he had to go back to help his partner deal with the aftermath. Coincidentally, Xuan had also received the mission from Junwu, Ghost City Rescue. Xuan didn't think so at the time, but thinking back now, he realized maybe that operation went a little too smoothly. Xuan did rescue the Earthmaster from the dungeons of Paradise Manor. But how did he find the dungeon in the first place? Wasn't it because he saw the cursed shackle of Xuan's subordinate, the one who wore a demon mask, then saw him sneaking about Paradise Manor? Something like a cursed shackle was a sign of humiliation, and normally, when heavenly officials were banished, they would hide it away. So why did that masked man wear it on his wrist so openly? And why did he hide it afterward? Besides carelessness, the other explanation was that it was done intentionally to grab Xuan's attention, so Xuan could follow along and discover the imprisoned, fake Earthmaster. The real Mingyi, who had set off the distress signal, was probably killed after this. Because his corpse couldn't be destroyed, but his flesh also couldn't be kept to allow others to find clues of his identity, he was dissolved to nothing but white bones. The second accident was after Xuan was spooked by the Reverend of Empty Words, and he sought Xuan for help. It was obvious that Xuan didn't want Xuan to be pulled into this affair, which was why, at the time, Mingyi declared, "Coming here was not my intention." Afterward, when they were at the terrace of Cascading Wine, when Xuan went away, it was probably to meet up with Mingyi and to question what was going on. Xuan didn't have the chance to explain all of this to Xuan in detail, but Xuan himself must have gradually thought each detail through as well. The hands hiding under his sleeves were trembling. The two walked side by side, and Xuan's mind was churning. Just where had Xiaodu gone? The first one to cross through that array to leave was Xiaodu, and the last one was Mingyi, so he shouldn't have been able to jump over Xuan to do anything to Xiaodu, which meant that there were three possibilities. The first, that Xiaodu was sent somewhere else. The second, that there was something else waiting where Xiaodu was sent, and he had already fallen victim. And the third, that Xiaodu left on his own. If it was the first or second possibility, then there was no reason for Mingyi to keep acting in front of Xuan right now, searching for Xiaodu. Having thought this far, Xuan suddenly heard Mingyi ask, "Where's your golden locket?" Xuan was momentarily puzzled, but Xuan was immediately filled with dread. Mingyi asked a couple of times before Xuan responded, "Huh?" Mingyi said gruffly, "Didn't you say those two golden longevity lockets were forged by the golden cause of you and your brother, and if the master is hurt, that they would cry?" Xuan told Mingyi everything, so naturally he also knew how that spiritual device worked, which meant he was going to use the golden locket to find Xiaodu. But my scratches are healed, Xuan said. "That's easy to solve," Mingyi said coldly. Then he raised his arm slightly. Xuan was alarmed. Was he going to cut Lord Windmaster? He tensed in defense. However, Mingyi squeezed the gash on his own arm instead. The gash that had already ceased bleeding oozed again. "Give me the locket, I'll wear it," he said. Seeing this, Xuan couldn't help but be awed. If this gesture hadn't stemmed from hidden maliciousness and murderous intent, then such a person truly would have been worth befriending. However, Xuan was still rooted to the spot, hesitant to move. The moment he gave the longevity locket, the two golden lockets would cry for each other. Should Xiaowudu notice, he would for sure come and find him directly. Mingyi furrowed his brows. "Are you scared, stupid?" he asked. "No," Xuan said. "Actually, this locket, didn't I tell you? It only works if I'm the one who wears it." Mingyi looked doubtful. "Really?" he asked. Xuan gripped the longevity locket tightly and nodded his head firmly. "That's right," he said. Mingyi stared at him for a moment, but then seemed to abandon the idea. He looked at the gash on his own arm, but didn't say anything. Just then, that longevity locket around Xuan's neck suddenly started vibrating. The colors of Xuan's face suddenly changed, and Mingyi reacted immediately, going in the direction that the longevity locket was pointed, without pause. The golden locket's cry meant that Xiaowudu was hurt. When he entered the array earlier, he was perfectly fine. So what had hurt him? Xuan could sense that Xuan was anxious to go, but also not. They were trapped in the illusion within the Blackwater Lake, and there was no one else on the island. Pei Ming was building a coffin boat outside the boundary, waiting for their return. Xuan was mortal right now. If Xiaowudu was hurt, no one in heaven or earth could heed their call. If they were to give themselves up, how could they possibly escape? After rushing for a while, Xuan spoke up. "Mingxiang, I think it's a trap. It's probably best not to go." "What trap?" Mingyi asked. Xuan lied bold-facedly. "How can my brother possibly get hurt? It must not be him over there." However, Mingyi had more reasons and rationale than he did. We're in the territory of a supreme demon king. Lord Watermaster might not have what it takes to protect himself. No matter what it is, let's go take a look first. Xuan couldn't think of an excuse not to go, and Xuan couldn't come up with anything either. He watched silently instead, ready to act at a moment's notice. Following the growing vibrations of the longevity locket, the two walked closer and closer to the target. Soon, they saw Xiaowudu lying on the ground, scruffily curled up, holding his stomach, looking to be in intense pain. Xuan was shocked and shouted, "Go!" He rushed over with Mingyi close behind. Yet when they approached Xiaowudu, he suddenly leapt to his feet and embraced him, bursting out in crazed laughter. Fully enveloped in his arms, Xuan was exceedingly bemused, and only then did he realize that the man bore a twisted face. It wasn't Xiaowudu. It was only an insane maniac dressed in Xiaowudu's robes and wearing that golden locket. He hadn't yet opened his mouth to speak when Mingyi, who was next to him, suddenly collapsed. A small, ball-sized black hole appeared on his chest, spilling fresh blood. A figure in white leapt off a tree, then grabbed Xuan and ran, shouting, "Run!" Xuan looked closely and saw that this was the real Xiaowudu. "Go!" Xuan exclaimed. Xiaowudu barked with a low voice. "Don't talk and come with me. He's no good." In a flash, Xuan understood. It turned out that Xiaowudu wasn't one to be underestimated either. The moment he had walked out of the transportation array and saw that he was still in the nether water manor, he had known that something was amiss. He didn't think as complicated as Xuan did, and he was much sharper. The first one he suspected was Mingyi, so he hid to make himself invisible, watching from the shadows to see just what he was up to. He was probably sent to a different location from the one that Xuan was sent to. Otherwise, he would have taken Xuan along to hide with him. After finding Mingyi and Xuan together, he dragged a maniac over, dressed it in his outer robes, and put the golden locket around its neck. Then he smacked it with a blast, garnering Mingyi's attention before ambushing. It was a rather ruthless move, because there wasn't any solid proof that Mingyi did anything, yet Xuan was going straight for his life. Xuan couldn't help but look back, but when he did, he saw Mingyi, whose heart was now blasted through, lie for a bit before sitting up. He stoically lowered his head to look at that bloody hole before slowly rising to his feet. Xuan could feel Xuan's blood run cold all the way to his own heart. Even for heavenly officials, who could move so easily after being struck like this? It had to be something inhuman. The two brothers dashed for a while, when suddenly the hairs on Xuan's neck stood. He shouted, "Watch out!" He pulled the watermaster, and a sharp, whistling sound shot through the air, flashing chillingly by. If it wasn't for Xuan's tug, the watermaster would have already lost his head. It was those invisible creatures from the water's reflection. Xuan cursed. He flipped out the watermaster fan and swung. Several thin and long water arrows jetted out through the waves on the surface of his fan, encircling their bodies and forming a protective circle. Now, those invisible creatures couldn't do anything to them. The two continued to flee, and Xuan couldn't help but look back again. This time, he could feel chills down his spine. He's catching up, he shouted. Sure enough, Mingyi was only about 20 feet behind them, walking forward slowly. Although it looked like his steps were slow, with every step, the distance between him and the two ahead would instantly pull significantly closer, looking like with several more steps, he could touch the hems of their robes. Xuan never looked back, but with one more swing of his fan, 20 to 30 more razor-sharp, dragon-like water arrows shot out from the surface of his fan. Even though they were made of water, they ripped through the air like steel blades. With another swing, their numbers doubled. Fanning a few times, hundreds of water arrows jetted toward Mingyi, attacking him from all around. But with one misstep, his body would be pierced with holes. Yet, Mingyi caught the first water arrow with his bare hands and yanked it like it was a rope. That watermaster fan was snatched out of Xuan's hand. The moment the fan left his hand, the water dragon arrows that were dancing wildly in the skies instantly dissolved into drizzles, falling from above. Xuan abruptly stopped in his step and looked at his hand in disbelief. Hundreds of years, and this was the first time that anyone was able to take the watermaster fan from his hand. He knew that he couldn't escape anymore, and finally looked back. Mingyi was walking toward them with steady steps. His entire person seemed to be going through an intricate transformation. With every step, a change happened. That already blanched face seemed to become even paler, with the same bloodless translucence as Xuan's. His forehead became sharper, his brows deeper, which naturally made him appear even more somber. The hems of his once plain black robes silently and inconspicuously grew patterns of waves, woven with thin threads, shimmering with a mysterious silver glow. Once he had arrived before the wind and water masters, his face was about the same, but he was already a completely different person. The Earth Master wasn't a martial god, so he was no good at martial arts. His spiritual powers were average. However, obviously neither of these points applied to the one before them now. "Just who are you?" Xuan demanded cautiously. Mingyi seemed to have found the question funny and squinted his eyes. "You're standing in my territory, and you need to ask who I am." "Blackwater, Demon Xuan," Xuan ventured. Mingyi glanced at Xuan, but Xuan didn't react. Xuan continued, "You've always been the Earth Master, or..." He trailed off as he guessed too. "I see," he finished. However, what he figured out was only that Demon Xuan had infiltrated the heavens. Xuan said, "You and I have always minded our own business. Well waters don't interfere with rivers. We've ruled over our own domains. Intruding in your territory wasn't my intention. So why don't we both take a step back?" "Water Tyrant," Mingyi responded. "So there are also times when you don't dare to be tyrannical?" Xuan was proud by nature, and hearing this, displeasure flashed across his face. Since they were under someone else's roof and his younger brother was by his side, he had to lower his head. Still, he wasn't willing to back down. "If it wasn't the wrong place and time, I wouldn't be afraid of you," he said. Mingyi took another step forward and said chillingly, "Xuan, look at my face. Do you know who I am?" Xuan watched him with a frown. He had also seen the face of the Earth Master a few times, so he didn't understand what he was trying to say. "You want me to tell you who you are?" he asked. After a pause, he thought that Mingyi was trying to imply that his identity couldn't be revealed, so he said, "It doesn't matter who you are. I swear on my Water Master name, as long as you don't involve me or my brother, I won't care for anything you do." He hadn't finished his sentence before Mingyi cut him off icily. "Noble people are really forgetful. Water Tyrant, how many mortal names and mortal birds did you flip through back then to so arduously find the one me? What? It hasn't even been a few 100 years, and you've already forgotten what I look like?" Hearing this, Xuan's face was starting to twitch little by little. The expression of having seen a ghost that only mortals experienced was now showing on his face for the first time. Xuan's pupils shrank to the smallest they could, and he blurted out, "You're still alive?" "I'm dead," Xuan said coldly. Then he raised a hand, pressed his fingers together, and swung his palm upward. Xuan felt a sudden pain lunging at his head, and it seemed that Xuan was affected by Xuan's spiritual might and fainted.